You grow when you force yourself out of your comfort zone to do hard things.
Totally.
Yes.
And I think that every time we get up and speak or do something like that, it helps us and it makes you better. Even now, like as experienced as we are at it, like every time you do it, it becomes easier. Welcome to our Industrial Advisors podcast. You have Bill Condon and Matt McGregor, and one of my favorite all-time guests that we've ever had, Mahrin McGregor. Mahrin is a sophomore at Clemson.
Yes.
And
you said it with the P. Good job.
Hey, man, I'm like family, right?
That's right.
Yes.
I've known Mahrin since she was a little girl and watched her really develop over the years into this amazing person who is extremely talented at a lot of different things. Our topic today is fear of public speaking. And it's great to have Mahrin on because Mahrin had a real fear of public speaking early on in her life. I would say in kind of, 6th, 7th, 8th grade probably, and I'll let you talk more about it. And has overcome that. And we'll talk about some of the successes, but it's a really cool story. So great to have you on, Mahrin. A couple stats before we kind of jump into it. Fear of public speaking is probably the number one fear out there, right, in society today. So it's a really good topic, I think, to talk about. We all have stories about how we've overcome certain fears of public speaking. So happy to jump right into this.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll kick off with mine.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Mahrin inherited it from me, but certainly it's not a genetic thing, but I had it, and I had it due to my upbringing. So as many of the listeners know, you certainly know that I have dyslexia, and they put me in a program at St. Luke's for dyslexia, but a lot of the nuns, there was only one class out of the 6 you took that was really for it. The other ones, you were just in the classes and back then, nuns were the teachers. And so I remember, like, it would be my turn to read, and we'd all be reading a book, and, each person would have a paragraph, right? And I would be counting the people trying to figure out my paragraph because I was dyslexic and was a terrible reader. So I'd be going, okay, there are 6 people, freaking out, trying to figure out which paragraph would be mine. And then I would go over it 10 times and try to master it. And then, of course, the girl in front of me would take 5 paragraphs, overachiever, right?
Yeah.
And then completely throw me off. I'd be in a panic. Next thing I'm up in the corner, literally, they'd think you were screwing around or whatever. They'd put you up in the corner. It was like torment, right? So I developed a big issue with public speaking to the point where I would sweat, dry throat. I just wasn't good at it.
Yeah.
Knowing where I was going to go in my career, that wasn't the option, right? That couldn't happen. So early on in my 20s, I signed up for Toastmasters, which basically you can go to different Toastmasters. Back then, they'd meet at Denny's restaurants or wherever, and there'd be a dozen people. A lot of lawyers would do it, getting ready for their trials. And so they would want to speak in front of people. And so it's a national organization called Toastmasters. You can get on Toastmasters.com. You can go to different formats all over the place, and they meet. I did that, and then I did a 12-week course on public speaking with Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie obviously passed away a long time ago, but he's most known for overcoming the fear of public speaking. So I did the 12-week course, loved it so much that I then worked for the organization for about a year after that and helping instruct those courses. Through that, I would say it covered 90% of it. And then it was, just repeating, doing constant conferences. And it probably took another 10 years after that to really rid it because there's a lot of baggage that came with it, right? Yeah. So that's how my history with the fear of public speaking. What about yours, Mahrin?
Yeah, well, funny enough, I wasn't originally scared of public speaking at all, just because I've always been a pretty confident kid, always knew who I was. My mom made me do pageants when I was young, so that's kind of the biggest public speaking that you can do in that age. And it started, you think fifth grader, so I don't really remember it that way. But I have a key memory in seventh grade of I'd never really prepared for presentations. I was kind of always like, oh, I'm just going to do this. Like, I'm confident on the fly. And I was in a group presentation with another girl in my grade, and we were doing some sort of historical presentation in front of a really small class, like 16 people. And I remember standing up there and I had my note cards, and just all of a sudden, like, I started freaking out in the middle of it. You know, I'd gotten up there, it was fine. I started shaking and my throat got really tight and my mouth got dry, to the point where when I heard myself talking, I was like, oh, I sound really bad. Like, people can definitely tell I'm nervous, which makes it so much worse when you think that other people think you're nervous, even though mostly they don't realize. So that's kind of my key memory of where it started. And I feel like the fear just kind of snowballed from there to the point where I thought every presentation or every time I spoke in front of a group, everyone could tell how nervous I was, which originally I'm sure they couldn't, but since it got so bad, I'm sure they could. To the point in my senior year, obviously during COVID, we didn't really have to practice public speaking, being on Zoom, so that fear kind of got pushed under, and since I didn't have to confront it at all, I didn't think about it until going back to school, you know, here and there with junior year, but there wasn't as much talking in class until senior year. I was in a marine biology class, and best teacher ever, Mr. Finn. I loved him, super engaging.
Mr. Finnegan.
Mm-hmm, yes, best, yes.
He's awesome.
The best, he's awesome, yes.
Great teacher.
Amazing.
Amazing person at the best high school in America.
Exactly, yeah. So he was incredible, and the way that he kept us engaged was kind of in an elementary way of popsicle sticks. So he would put everyone in the class's names in like a little jar with popsicle sticks, and he would call on us. So review stuff we knew, you know, I talked about last class. So, oh, Ava, you know, the octopus has whatever, like stuff like that. And so my fear had gotten so bad that, and again, this class is small high school, Blanchette.
Yeah.
All friends in my class. My boyfriend was in the class. I sat at a table with some of my best friends. This wasn't like a scary situation, but it had gotten so bad to the point where if I knew I was going to have the chance of being called on, I would have so much anxiety all class that I couldn't even focus, and I didn't know what we were talking about because the entire class, similar to you saying you were counting, I was just waiting to be called on. So stressed, and it gave me such bad anxiety that I remember leaving class sometimes pretending I was sick, like going and sitting in my car. Like, I just was totally paralyzed by just the thought of being called for a one-word answer that I knew the answer to. Like, every time someone else was called, I was like, I know what the answer is. And I remember I told my dad this, and I was struggling with this in English class too, with popcorn reading, like such bad anxiety about having to read, again, in a class full of all of my good friends.
Yeah.
So we were sitting on my bed, and since it was my senior year, I had my tassel on my bed, and I remember he had taken it and like twisted it up a bunch, and he was like, this is how you're feeling right now, super tight, and we just need to like unravel that anxiety. So for a little, why don't you just ask to not be called on? So I did, which was really embarrassing for me, having to email my teachers as a senior, especially as someone who was seen as like a confident kid, being like, can you not call on me in class? And so they were super nice, super understanding. You know, Mr. Finn is awesome. Miss Christensen, my English teacher, she was totally understanding. They were great. And so that definitely helped to minimize just taking a minute and being like, okay, I don't have to worry about that anxiety. Like, I don't have to have the thought of getting called on, but we knew that that wasn't going to work forever. You can't just push it away.
Not a long-term solution.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also know that, you know, I probably want to be in development or real estate. So like you guys, public speaking is a really important skill. So I don't know. I would say it followed me through freshman year a little.
I feel, well, what maybe as a transition to that, so that's what happened.
Yes,
but now, you know, and we'll get to, you know, where you're at now, but what did you do to start overcoming it?
I think that it was really a struggle for a while, but I would, you know, I tried to do a lot of stuff, like the deep breathing, and a big reminder I would always tell myself is no one's like paying attention and no one really cares. And the biggest thing, I remember at the end of my freshman year of college, I had a pretty big presentation for a music class that I was so nervous for. And I was just like reminding myself that no one else can tell how nervous I am, because my biggest anxiety was always, since my throat would close, that my voice was really shaky. And I always thought other people could hear that. And so I just decided to talk really loud and slow. And I think that helped a lot. And I got a lot of praise. Like, a lot of people were like, that was a great presentation. You know, you're great at speaking. And so I think through that, I reminded myself no one knows how nervous I was, but I still knew I needed to figure out the anxiety beforehand, because that type of anxiety can be really debilitating. Like, I was at the point where if I knew I had a presentation even a month away, it was coming up at least once a day or every other day, thinking about it and the anxiety of it, which is not a way to go about things. But the biggest thing was this year, so Clemson, this is pretty amazing that they do it. They require you to take a public speaking class.
Yeah, it's great.
Once throughout your 4 years. You can do it first semester freshman, last semester senior, which I don't know why you would want to do that. But it's a public speaking course, and you basically have this class. You know, you learn about different type of like commencement speeches, stuff like that, different speeches, humor, all of that. And through the course, you give to your class about 5 speeches, and all of them except for one are on note cards that can only have a certain amount of words. So nothing's like memorized. It's kind of partially on the fly, partially you've practiced it before.
Yeah.
And that made all the difference in the world. Like, I told my teacher this after I finished her class. I was like, I never thought that I could get to the point of where I finished in your class, just being able to stand up and give an 8-minute speech with a couple of note cards about difficult topics. They weren't all just, you know, fun.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, you know, the story is, you know, you recognized like you had a real fear, right? And took a little bit of time off and then jumped into it, right? You didn't like stay out of it, you know? So you jumped in and then have developed this really good sense for doing it, right? I remember for me, like the first time I was really, I've never been like fearful of getting in front of people and talking, but I was really nervous the time I was named managing director at like 27 or 28 years old, and going into this company with a bunch of people that have been in the industry for 25 or 30 years.
Right.
And I was going in, getting introduced as this like, you know, the leader of this, or, you know, basically organization where, you know, I'm walking in 5-6 years into the business, and I thought a lot about like, what do I want my message to be? And ultimately I just went in and was like, I'm going to be just authentic as can be and true to myself. And if, you know, if people want to buy in, great. If they don't, you know, that's okay. They'll find a new place to go to work. But like, just staying true to like what you believe and not trying to be somebody that you're not, just being as authentic as you can, I think is super helpful in those situations.
Yeah.
For sure.
But yeah, I remember that. I was like the young new person, and it was like, what do I want to do here? And I was nervous about that.
Yeah.
And you had a few people in there that were 50s, 60s that certainly, you know, challenged you from a perspective of who the heck are you?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've been doing, you know, and like that's just natural. Like people fear change, and someone comes in and like, you know, I've been doing this 30 years. You've been doing it 5. What can you tell me? You know, it's like, you know, that's not uncommon, but it is really, so how do like your friends, like your peers, right?
Yeah.
Are they nervous about this stuff? Or do you think like society is getting better at it? I still feel like it's a really big fear in people.
It's a big
I
fear.
think it's for sure like the number one fear. And I think we're getting worse just because of so much technology. I think it takes out a lot of probably even conferences that would happen in your guys' industry are happening on Zoom, whereas they used to happen in person. And I feel like that takes out some of the anxiety because you're not standing in front of a room. I think that people are more isolated than they used to be just because of social media and everything. So, and kids my age are way more anxious than probably when you guys were, your guys' age, just in general. And so,
and the pandemic, you made that point earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard. I mean, for your era, and give or take 2 to 3 years each way, right? Like that was impactful.
For sure. Yeah. I mean,
I would say it was mostly impactful for the kids, but it even took us being brokers, presenters, out of practice for a while. Because when I just did this recent keynote, I realized, wow, it's been a while since I've been on a stage, right? Because you and I used to do it all the time.
Yeah.
And then
really, you had been on, but it hadn't been that long.
I mean, through COVID, we weren't on stages.
Right.
So
but
you kind
after the pandemic, like that keynote that you just gave, which Matt just gave a keynote at this huge conference, the Massimo Con. That's what it's called.
Yeah, it was great. But in prepping for it, like I would say prior to COVID, you and I were getting on stages, like, Mahrin, giving speeches, a few times a year at least, right?
Yes, yeah.
And then all of a sudden we went through a few years there where we weren't going to conferences and not getting on stages. So to my point, that was the first big one I realized I had done in quite some time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I did it a couple times last year.
Yeah, because a few of those nerves came back and I was like, I thought I shook this.
It's like the nerves you get. It's like a good nervous
more
energy.
Excitement
it's like the kind you get before a football game or when you're playing or in a sport or whatever. Like you played basketball, you get that nervous energy before the game.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's like the whistle blows and it's like game on. Let's go.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
But I think doing it just like, and I told Carly, like when Carly went to high school and college, I gave her the same advice. Like,
this is Bill's daughter, Carly.
Yeah, sorry. Not everybody knows this.
Senior at Gonzaga.
But I told her, like, hey, just challenge yourself to get out of your comfort zone.
For sure.
Right? That's when you grow, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people talk about it all the time and it's really true.
Yeah.
You grow when you force yourself out of your comfort zone to do hard things.
Totally.
Yes.
And I think that every time we get up and speak or do something like that, it helps us and it makes you better. Even now, like as experienced as we are at it, like every time you do it, it becomes easier.
Mahrin gave us a term for that.
The exposure therapy.
Exposure therapy.
That was a term that
like, what's that word?
Yeah, right. I was like sitting there when you guys were talking. I was like, I know, because my teacher, my public speaking teacher had said it and I'd heard it before, but I kind of was always like, oh, it's one of those like another whatever therapy like term. And it's so true though. Like the more that I spoke, that was the biggest thing is I could tell myself to do the deep breathing and, tell myself no one cares, which all helps a little bit. But the biggest thing was practicing beforehand. Like I would sit in my room, sit in the mirror, record myself, time myself at least 7 times to the point where I was like, I could do this in my sleep. And then just doing it. Like there was, I mean, to your question of, do you think it's a big fear? Yeah, there was kids in my public speaking class who couldn't do the speeches, wouldn't be there on the day they did the speeches. There was a couple like stumbling and just having to stop overall. And I get that. Like I totally felt for them because a lot of us have that same anxiety. And so I think that just getting up there and doing it, even though it's so uncomfortable and scares you, was the biggest thing that helped me. Like just doing it over and over, being like, yeah, this sucks, but like I have to do it eventually. And so, that helps.
Before we close with your current successes, I will tell the listeners 2 things in addition to what you said that helped me a lot. Number 1 is, I think everybody knows this, but don't ever memorize a speech, okay? Start with a story, a personal story, because those are so easy to tell, and audiences love personal stories. So that can relax you. And going into it, if you're behind stage or you're in the queue and you're next up and your heart starts going, Mahrin mentioned breathing before. And I learned something called square breathing a long time ago, where you take a slow breath in for 8 seconds, you hold the breath for 8 seconds, and you release the breath for 8 seconds, and you're breathing in a square. It literally reduces your heart rate. And so you can take a high heart rate down through square breathing very quickly, relax yourself, boom, go tell the personal story, and then you're in the groove.
Yeah.
Those 2 things help me a lot. So if you guys ever see me on stage, you will hear a personal story first.
Yeah.
Every time. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about SIP. You mentioned that speech class at Clemson, but you advanced into something else, and then you are now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I love bragging on you, but I believe you're the only sophomore being looked at now through the final set for the sales and innovation program for the traveling team.
I don't know about that. There's a possibility of that, but I don't know who else is.
You might not be the only sophomore.
Right.
Okay, I see.
We don't know.
But you're in the final round.
Yes. So we'll see.
Or 6 people for the traveling team?
Probably, yeah, small group.
Yeah.
Very small group.
Okay.
So yeah, but yeah, with the class, the class was life-changing, clearly, because I'm talking about it a lot. But I had such a sweet teacher, Miss Peichel, and she had pulled me aside after my informative speech, or persuasive speech. So we got to pick a topic and then try to persuade the audience. You had to cite peer-reviewed articles, all of that. And I chose to do my speech on how influencers are promoting like materialism and just overconsumption, which was a really fun topic to research. I felt like it was very relevant.
Yeah, I bet.
Having like TikTok and Instagram and all of that. So after I gave it in class, she told me that I should submit it for Clemson's public speaking competition, which is called Tiger Speak Out, and they do it once a semester through the classes. So you write your persuasive speech for the class, give it, and then you can submit it and go through. So I had submitted my outline that I wrote, and I made it through the first round, which I was shocked. I really just did it to kind of appease her and tell her that I did it. And then I filmed myself over Thanksgiving break giving it, got through the second round, which again, I was shocked by because that was a one take too. I did it and I was like, well, we'll see if it's good enough.
Yeah.
Because honestly, in my heart of hearts, I really didn't want to do the public speaking competition because that is terrifying to me. So I got through and made it to the finals, which there was 6 of us in the finals, and I think there had been like 100 applicants. And I'd prepared a bunch, I'd given this speech probably 15 times at this point, in front of my friends, in front of my class, to myself, to my family. And I like put on my suit, walked in, my friends came to support me, and I walked in, and it was this massive auditorium. Like, I was not ready. I about died.
You thought it was going to be a few people.
I thought, I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I'm like, who's
Here we
coming to
go.
watch the little public? Like,
Come on.
I was like, I, as a student, wouldn't want to watch the student public speaking competition. Like, sorry, that's not, what I want to do. But it was full. There was probably a couple hundred people there. So I walked in and I was like, oh, like there was mics and everything like these.
Yeah.
And I was just not prepared for that, but I think that was actually a good thing that I didn't know how serious it was. Right. It was filmed, put on YouTube and everything, and I was super nervous, obviously, and I could tell the kids next to me were too, because, they're just like sitting there like this. So I was just like, I'm going to make this as casual as possible, talk to the girl next to me, and I was 5th out of 6 speakers, which is, I would have preferred to go on first,
Absolutely.
Get it over. So I'm like sitting there,
it's the
like
worst to be at the end,
sitting there like, oh my God, please, totally like shaking. And I was telling my dad this. I had gotten up and every person had their own, or we had to share the same mic pack. So we switched, and my hands were shaking. I had these acrylic nails, and I couldn't get the thing. So the whole audience is hearing. So I'm like, oh my God, like this could not be going worse. Yeah. And I stand up there like in the middle, hundreds of people watching. And as soon as I started speaking, no nervousness. Yeah. Like it was, and that was the first time that's happened since 5th grade. So on
like the biggest stage too.
Right. Yeah. And I felt so good. Like I was like, I wish my speech was longer because I just want to keep speaking. Like I felt very confident, very powerful. And I got last place. I got 6 out of 6 and I did not care. Like my friends like brought me flowers and they were like, you deserved more. Like you did so good. And I was like, I don't care, because the fact that I did it and felt good while doing it, I was like, I could have gotten 100.
Also 6 out of 100.
Yeah. Also, I was going to say, like, you're up there with the top people. So, whether you were 1st, 2nd, 6th, 5th, you're up there doing it. So good job.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, that's a wrap, Mahrin. Great job. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. Thanks to the listeners. And happy Friday.